Oz here and welcome back to my channel on a Tuesday. This means that we are having a Taboo Tuesdays episode discussing a topic that is not kind of taboo. It's more of a popular topic nowadays, but I really believe that the information going around this topic is not enough or is just not clear enough. So I decided to do some research and get myself into mental health and into mental disorders. I will kind of cover briefly mental disorders and illnesses and how they can be diagnosed and how they can be treated and how they can be prevented, and then I'll tell you some facts on mental health and mental illnesses. So first, I will define mental health. Mental health is a level of psychological well-being or an absence of mental disorder. This state of mind is crucial for overall well-being as physical and as mental, so you can feel good in your skin and not be sick. So, since nowadays it has become really popular to nourish yourself mentally, you kind of can see a lot going on social media about this topic of mental health. You can hear that you have to be healthy in here in order to be healthy out here. There are many misconceptions which I'm going to clear now when talking about mental disorders. A mental illness or disorder is a mental behavioral pattern that causes either suffering or a poor ability to function in ordinary life. It is usually defined by how a person thinks, feels, acts, and behaves. And these things can be associated with several parts of the brain, which can cause someone to think or feel or perceive or behave in such ways. There are many different causes of development of mental illnesses in one's mind, but doctors are still unsure and there have not been any calculations or measures that could have shown what really causes mental illnesses. There are many cultural, societal, religious, and outside forces that have to be taken account when treating or even diagnosing one with a mental illness. I don't know if you knew this, but there are many types of mental illnesses and I'm going to list them now. So there are adjustment disorders, there are anxiety disorders, for example, panic disorder, phobias, social anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. There are childhood disorders such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, separation anxiety disorder, and autism spectrum disorder. There are eating disorders, which are really common nowadays, which are anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. Also, mood disorders are really popular nowadays, such as major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder. There are neurocognitive disorders such as delirium or alcohol-induced neurocognitive disorders, and there are personality disorders such as paranoia, being antisocial, dependent personality disorder, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. And the most known and most dangerously perceived disorders are the psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia or brief psychotic disorder. And obviously there are substance-related disorders such as those related to alcohol consumption, caffeine consumption, drug consumption such as cocaine, opium, other hallucinogens, and tobacco or marijuana consumption. Now these are the major groups of mental disorder, and which I've mentioned as examples are just a really small portion of mental disorders which exist, since there are newer and newer mental disorders developing in people each day and scientists probably do not know about them. So now on to how to diagnose someone or something. There are many online websites or spaces where you can diagnose yourself or someone, but that does not mean that you or that person really has that mental disorder. You can kind of look at the symptoms for yourself or for somebody else, but the diagnosis can only be made by a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Sadly, many people still do not believe that mental illnesses are real illnesses, and they only believe that these are just phases in your life and that your behavior will change over time and you'll get through it, but sometimes you just can't. So if you are experiencing any symptoms of any of the disorders or illnesses which are severe, if you experience any radical changes in your behavior or in someone else's behavior, just try to talk to them and try to convince them, we could be talking about a mental disorder, to visit a psychologist or a psychiatrist or just a regular doctor and tell them what's going on. Also, I have to mention that mental illnesses can last a varying time, so some of them last only 1 week and some of them can last a lifetime, and also the time when they get discovered or when they start, when the people start getting ill varies a lot too. Prevention is key. There are many ways to prevent mental disorders developing, but they are not the same as you would think. For example, depression can be prevented by interventions, which is quite costly, but it can be prevented that way. Anxiety usually can be prevented by cognitive behavioral therapy, which is usually taught in school. So you might not notice, but this is how teachers teach you. And psychosis can be actually prevented by therapy. The management of mental illnesses can vary a lot depending on the person, depending on the type of illness, and depending on how severe it is. Usually patients get diagnosed and treated by psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, but if the illness requires the person to be medicated, they will be medicated and they will be given medicine. This is due to the fact that medicines can kind of balance the hormonal levels in the brain so that you won't feel the way that you would with a mental disorder. However, this does not mean a permanent solution. This just reduces the symptoms, so you should definitely combine the both if it is that severe. Although I'm not a professional to tell you what to do, you should consult with a professional psychologist or psychiatrist. And now on to the most interesting part of the whole video, facts that you might not have known. Most people think that those who have mental illnesses are unpredictable and are aggressive, but that is not true, because it really depends on the person, on how the medication affects them, or the mental illness itself. Between 1 in 12 and 1 in 15 children are self-harming in some way over the world. Over the past decade, the number of young persons who have been hospitalized due to self-harm has increased by 68%. Actually, 72% of kids have some kind of emotional or behavioral disorder. About 800,000 people commit suicide every single year. Mental illness can trigger other kind of infections and illnesses in your body physically. Mental illnesses are more common than cancer, diabetes, or heart attacks. And mental illnesses do not equal to intellectual disabilities, since mental illnesses are only changing the way of thinking, perceiving, and behaving of a person, while intellectual disorders usually affect how someone can deal with stuff, or they limit the intellectual functions and certain skills of the people. Now for the last part, I wanted to mention some famous people who you might not have known to have a mental illness. One of the most known examples would be John Nash, who was a mathematician and he suffered from schizophrenia. If you haven't watched the film A Beautiful Mind, I would definitely recommend it because it is about his life and it's just wonderful. Franz Liszt, a Hungarian composer, suffered from depression. Van Gogh suffered from anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder, and he was a painter, if you haven't known him. Tchaikovsky, another composer, has suffered from depression too. Weber, a philosopher, suffered from depression and insomnia. Michelangelo probably suffered from autism, and Darwin from agoraphobia. And finally, the best of all, which surprised me the most, Isaac Newton suffered from basically bipolar disorder and depression and anxiety and many other mental illnesses, but people just tend not to talk about that. But basically he most probably had almost every single kind of mental illness. So this was it for the video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I really hope that you've learned something today. I will link some useful links in the description bar below, along with some support links and support numbers worldwide. So definitely check out the info bar below. And also I wanted to thank you all for watching this video, and I really hope that you've enjoyed every single thing that I have said. If you have any questions or suggestions or stories that you wanted to share, just leave them in the comments below, because I will read them and I want you to get the discussion going. So if you know anyone who has self-harmed, who has gone through a mental illness, or who has a mental illness and would approve you sharing their story, or if you want to share something with us down there, just leave a comment below, because I'll be checking them and answering to them. So please guys, be healthy, be safe, and I'll see you on Sunday with a new video. Thank you for watching. I love you guys.